More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
¿Cómo le va? Estoy esperando la respuesta de mi colega. Está bien, perfecto. Segunda consola. A ti, perfecto. Dale. Inglés, por favor.
Gracias.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Señor presidente, con 20 delegaciones en el Simón.
Chair, We have 20 delegations. We have quorum, and we can begin. Thank you very much. Thank you, Assistant Secretary General. We have a quorum, and so I would like to bring to order this special meeting of the Permanent Council, which was convened in compliance with Mandate Resolution 3030 of the General Assembly to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law. We would like to begin by thanking the permanent representative of Mexico, Ambassador Luz Elena Baños Rivas, her team, as well as the staff of the Department of International Law of the General Secretariat for their dedication and collaboration, which have been indispensable in organizing this meeting. Esteemed colleagues, we are commemorating the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law in Panama. This was an historical event which kicked off the ongoing process to harmonize national legal frameworks in a context of growing social, economic, and technological interdependence. International private law has been essential to create a legal environment that is stable in our trans-border relationships, facilitating cooperation among states and offering legal security in civil, family, commercial, and procedural law. And it has allowed us to strengthen the inter-American legal system and ensure mutual respect amongst national legislation, always providing effective responses to emerging challenges in a region where there is constant transformation. However, in our current context characterized by international trade and mobility of persons and technological advances, we need to reflect on whether the inter-American instruments are appropriate and if they fit our needs. We live in a world in which limits and borders are only on maps, and so these are new challenges. This anniversary provides us a unique opportunity to evaluate our achievements and consider how we can update our existing mechanisms, ensuring that international private law evolves and responds to the demands of the 21st century. With the resolution of 3030 approved in Asunción, the General Assembly instructed member states to reflect on the sufficiency of current inter-American instruments and propose strategies to strengthen the OAS capacities in the development of international private law. This afternoon, our task is to identify steps to ensure that private international law continues to be a fundamental pillar in legal cooperation. With this objective in mind, I propose that we now approve or adopt, our order of business. In keeping with Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council, I present for your consideration the draft order of business in document CP/OD 2537/25. If there are no remarks or objections, it is adopted. Now we're going to move on to item 2 of our order of business, and it is a pleasure to give the floor to my friend, Ambassador Luz Elena Baños, Permanent Representative of Mexico. You have the floor, Madam. Thank you very much, Chair. It is an honor for Mexico to warmly welcome you to this special meeting of the Permanent Council, convened to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law, which we know as CDIP 1. And today we want to reflect together on the impact that the inter-American process of codification and harmonization of international private law has had on our societies. Also, whether it is current given the legal challenges we are facing now. I'd like to welcome the Secretary for Legal Affairs, Jean-Michel Arregui. Since the 19th century, the efforts to strengthen legal cooperation or private international law in the Americas have been ongoing. Precedents, such as the Bustamante Code were milestones in resolving disputes amongst legal systems. However, with the advances in international trade, increasing mobility of persons and the digital world, this means we need more flexible and specialized instruments to be able to respond to emerging challenges. So in January 1975, in the city of Panama, we had the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law, CDIP-1, that took place. And it kicked off an important process of intergovernmental negotiation. And through 7 editions, it produced 26 inter-American instruments, protocols, uniform documents, model laws. Thanks to this process, our region has a robust legal framework which has strengthened legal certainty and also helped trans-border legal transactions, trade, arbitration, family law, and others. Mexico has been a key stakeholder in the process. It has actively participated in all CDIP conferences, and we have played a protagonist role, especially in CDIP 5, which was held in my country in 1994, where instruments were adopted that were very transcendental. The Inter-American Convention on Law, applicable to international contracts, and also instruments on minors. Jose Luis Siqueiros, Lauro Frigueros, important jurists, have contributed to these inter-American norms. Esteemed colleagues, this anniversary provides us with an opportunity to look at the validity of CDIP's instruments and their ability to respond to challenges of the 21st century. The current economic dynamics and social dynamics have changed radically due to electronic trade, digitalization of documents, and the impact of artificial intelligence on the legal sector. This means we need an updated framework that ensures legal certainty in an interconnected world with technology. With this in mind, the OAS General Assembly, through Resolution AG Res 3030, International Law, instructed the Permanent Council to hold this special meeting with the aim of reflecting on the impact and validity of inter-American instruments adopted at the CDIP conferences to identify areas that need updating or modernizing, to look at contemporary challenges with respect to trans-border international relations, considering new technology and strategies to strengthen capacities at the OAS in the progressive development of private international law, including the possibility of convening future CDIPs or other mechanisms to promote the normative harmonization in the region. To this end, we will have the valuable participation of Dr. Gilberto Cuetan, who is a professor at the University of Panama, which is where the first CDIP took place, and the Secretary, of Legal Affairs, Jean-Michel Arregui, who will talk about the status of private international law in the inter-American system. We also have a panel of distinguished experts who will analyze the legacy of CD and the development of private international law in the short and medium term. I thank Dr. Cecilia Fresnedo, former member of the Inter-American Juridical Committee, Dr. Maria Mercedes Albornoz, Secretary General of the American Association of Private International Law, Dr. Nuria Gonzalez Martin, Chair of the Government Board of the Mexican Academy of Private International and Comparative Law, Dr. Marcos Dota Salguero, Director of International Law Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay, and Dr. Jorge Sanchez Cordero, External Advisor on Private International Law to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. I thank them for having accepted our invitation to present before this Honorable Permanent Council. Distinguished delegations, legal certainty and predictability in provisions are key to have sustainable development and the stability of our societies. Mexico reiterates its commitment to strengthening the inter-American normative framework and for effective legal cooperation amongst our states. We believe that this session will be a starting point to renew dialogue on the future of private international law in the Americas and to build strategies that will enable us to effectively respond to the challenges of globalization and digital transformation. I cannot conclude without thanking Secretary Arrigui for his support and also the Department of International Law in helping us prepare this meeting. And also I appreciate the presence of all delegations and the experts that will enrich our dialogue. We hope that this is a recognition of what has been built over the last 50 years, but also a new impetus to continue in our development of private international law in the Americas. And I reiterate that this is a cornerstone of the inter-American system, and the development of it is one of the most important contributions of the OAS. So it is a priority for Mexico. Thank you very much.
Agradecemos la intervención de la embajadora.
We thank Ambassador Luz Elena Baños, and we also thank her delegation for its contributions. The commitment of the ambassador has always been fundamental. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, let us begin with a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law with the presentation of Dr. Gilberto Butin, Professor of Private International Law of the University of Panama. Dr. Butin has been an important figure in the development of private international law, and his intervention will allow us to reflect on the achievements and challenges that we have faced during 50 years. This presentation will be done through a video that was already recorded. Thank you. In 1975, in the city of Panama, we had the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law in the Americas. That was the most important moment with respect to international law on the Americas, or in the Americas. This conference, CD, was to review the sources of private international law and to look at the Montevideo treaties, the Bustamante treaties, and to see how we could harmonize new trends in the region. As the OAS has said, Latin America and North America have two different systems. And so after the Second World War, we had the marriage of these two systems, common law and civil law. And so this was the first bridge between the Latin American system and the North American system. The Panama Convention on International Arbitration that's adopted by the United States and put into practice in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And at the same time, the Treaty on Letters Rogatory, which introduces the notification inter-party, which is a dynamic institution in procedural law, which is adopted through the Panama Convention. We have this convention on arbitration, then the convention on letters rogatory, also with respect to obtaining evidence, also others that have to do with conflicts between legal systems. And so in the Americas, the idea has to harmonize international law, both public and private. And this goes back to a conference that was held 200 years ago. And next year will actually be the 200th anniversary of these efforts to integrate our law. We also have the Lima Convention, which is the first convention which integrated 6 different laws about the conflict in contract law, procedural law, and statutes. So we have these fruits of the 50 years since the first Inter-American Specialist Conference on Private International Law, which then gave birth to 6 conferences more. I want to invite the Organization of American States, its delegates and member states, to look closely at private international law. And it is constitutional law, and it has to do with harmonization. Latin America was the pioneer in this, and it is part of our modernity. We have the Calvo Doctrine, which created international law and private international law. And so we believe that these are complementary. The Americas have a lot to offer with respect to conflicts between legislation, also with respect to protection of individuals. And we thank our ambassador and we thank our foreign minister, Minister Martinez. They have been supporting the development of private international law. The academic sector in Panama is presenting also different initiatives about industrial companies, those that manufacture artificial intelligence. This is going to be a contribution to technological development and also development of international law. Changes that are needed in the Americas. I want to recognize figures like Quintillo Avancin, Gonzalo Parra, Goldschmidt, and Antonio Bustamante, who is the father of the Bustamante Code, which addresses conflicts between legislation. And I wish you a wonderful conference, this commemoration of 50 years of private international law, which was born in Panama. Panama is a wonderful country, and we wish you a wonderful conference. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would ask Irene Delgado, the ambassador of Panama, to thank Professor Bodin for his intervention and for providing us that introduction to private international law in the Americas. We would like to hear from Jean-Michel Arregui, Secretary of Legal Affairs of the OAS. He is going to give us some context about the harmonization of private international law in our region and how that has evolved over the decades. Dr. Arregui, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Since the first American conference, there was concern to build a common legal framework to ensure peace and good relations between them. That not only meant peaceful resolution of disputes, public international law, but also personal relations, which have an influence on our daily lives. In other words, private international law. So there were some conferences to codify these norms, efforts made in the country through the Montevideo Convention, efforts in the framework of the international private law known as the Bustamante Code. These continue to be important in private international law in many countries. Inter-American law was also pioneering in coming up with private international law frameworks. This is also true in public international law. At the beginning of the 1970s, another path was adopted, adopting conventions on specific issues around which agreement could be reached. Then there were preparatory studies in which there was participation of the Inter-American Juridical Committee, the Secretariat for Legal Affairs, and a distinguished group of professors. They convened the first specialized conference. This is an intergovernmental organization provided for in the OAS Charter to deal with technical special issues or develop inter-American relations. In 1975, 50 years ago, in Panama, we had the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law, CDIP 1, in which 6 conventions were adopted on international arbitration, letters rogatory, obtention of evidence, and others. Then there were another 6 specialized conferences that were held in which 26 instruments have been adopted on many, many different issues: companies, execution of judgments, restitution of minors, capacity of persons, trafficking of minors, transportation of goods, among others. In general, the idea was to have treaties, but recently we have model laws and regulations. As you see, this is a whole host of issues which are not usually in the newspaper, but they do have an influence on daily lives of thousands of people. But there are many aspects that are out of the hands of just one country. We need to recognize that the first conventions were negotiated in a Latin American way. But in Panama, there were delegations from the United States and from Trinidad and Tobago. Those first treaties were drafted by participating countries. Then they were signed, although unfortunately they have not always been ratified. However, even in these cases, when they were not ratified, their principles were incorporated in national and domestic law, in commercial, civil, procedural, and family law. As from the beginning of this century, challenges have increased. There is more mobility with respect to goods and people. We need to be quicker in legislating, and legislation is trailing behind. The importance of the participation of common law in the inter-American system. The last 2 CD in 2002 and 2009 centered on developing model laws. For example, we have real estate guarantees, and the idea was to marry Latin American law with common law. Of course, these processes continue to be open. There are many issues to be dealt with, such as drafting new model laws. This could be through the difficult path of having new specialized conferences, or what's more simple is adopting these at the General Assembly. These are 2 valid paths. What's important are the results. We also have the recent achievements of the Inter-American Juridical Committee. They have written a great deal, for example, the guide on applicable law to international contracts, which can be integrated into domestic law. There are many stakeholders involved, member states through different bodies, such as this Permanent Council, or the CHAP, the Inter-American Juridical Committee, which can take on issues of its own initiative, meetings of experts which have been convened to talk about their contributions, also the American Association of Private International Law. All of these paths are open, and this meeting is a good example of this. Well, I remember some of the protagonists of those that helped us move forward in the Americas on private international law. Allow me to mention some names. From the General Secretariat, the Tatiana Meca, Director of International Law, Mr. Perte, at the Adoldo Badada and Jose Luis Siqueiros in the Inter-American Juridical Committee. And then we have Juan Materno Vasquez, who presided over the first CDEEP, and I'm just mentioning some people from this long list. This celebration will continue after this meeting. We have been organizing in our countries a whole host of points of contact, which we hope relaunch in the Americas, this pioneering spirit of developing private and international law that's common to all countries. And just some final comments, which I hope can guide your future work. If there's something that has lasted from CDEEP, it is not the idea of convening specialized conferences. This is a path that I think is difficult to continue with for different reasons. But what we have is the idea of the best specialists to come together to draft quality texts. If we look at the list of delegates in the different CDEEP, we will see the most important private international law jurists who are there. Today, more than ever, the development of private international law demands a very, very developed level of specialization, harmonization of different institutions and legislations, the development of trade, the sophistication of the modalities of international contracts, the circulation of services, goods, and people, the development of technology. These can only be addressed by specialists, like those specialists who went to CDEEP, where they exchanged their experiences and knowledge. I think we need to go back to that idea and have meetings of experts which are supported by the General Secretariat, and to determine how we can channel the results through institutions, which will not be these specialized conferences, but they can be technical bodies such as the Inter-American Juridical Committee or political bodies like the Permanent Council, so that we can have an approval of these developments at the General Assembly. Once again, thank you again, Chair, for having convened this meeting. We would like to thank the panelists, Dr. Bhutan, and Dr. Dota, Sanchez Cordero, and our special thanks to the Mission of Mexico, Ambassador Luz Elena Baños, and the Mission of Panama, Ambassador Irene Delgado. Thank you all so very much.
Agradecemos profundamente al doctor Jean-Michel Arregui.
Boundless thanks to Dr. Jean-Michel Arregui for this stellar review of how international private law has evolved within the ambit of this organization and with the influence of others. His experience and overall career of over 3 decades has certainly been extremely enriching for us all, I'm sure. We have a panel here specialized on Latin American international private law and the development of private international law in the Americas in general, in the short and longer run. And the panel will address various different aspects that will certainly touch on their own views as to how various inter-American conferences on the development of international private law have made a difference to us and how we can perhaps better face challenges in the future. Let us begin with Dr. Cecilia Fresnedo, the ex-member of the Inter-American Juridical Panel, and I would like to welcome her to this meeting virtually and offer her the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Voy a hacer.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like very briefly to home in on 4 points. First of all, the question of the codification of international private law in the Americas. Can you hear me? We can hear you very well, and you don't need to raise your voice. Just speak naturally, madam. I was saying how this looked at the middle of the 20th century and how CDEEP made a difference. That is what I would like to focus on here. At that time, halfway through the century, what we saw in Americas was 3 major systems of international private law. First of all, there was a statement on conflict of laws. There was the Bustamante Codec and the Montevideo Codec that go back to 1890 and later. First of all, the focus was to try on conciliating different trends, but that particular idea did not prosper. The codification of international private law after that was kind of frozen for 20 days until 1965, when all of a sudden it burst forth on the scene again, following an Inter-American Juridical Conference that moved to reorganize things. Back in 1971, the General Assembly of the OAS accepted that recommendation of the committee, and to follow up on the first conference that was held in Panama in 1975, the interpreter corrects herself, 1975. CDEEP, as you know, speaks to intergovernmental meetings that aim at codifying international private law. That is the main moving principle. This flows from the charter of the OAS, and the process became both organic and institutional. Now, the Inter-American Juridical Committee, which is actually based on the notion that it can support the committee and move toward the codification of the law, both private and public, also includes the idea of tackling legal issues that flow from particular circumstances that are or were abounding in developing countries, and how the legislation of these different countries might best cover them. There is where the idea of a uniform code of law emerged. Professor Ronald Herbert, for his part, played an important role and generated a new sense of what all of this could mean. And it became a new chapter in the codification of international private law, putting an accent on the main principles that had always been followed and respected until the First World War. But expert Ronald Perty, referring to a conference that was held in 1975, said that, no, this was a new chapter. This was a new beginning. The interpreter regrets, but there is constant interruption in the manner of the video. I'm getting half sentences, doing the very best I can. This is a very bad connection. So the partial codification that focused on different issues, different themes, is what leads us to the CDEEP launching. So let me now refer to that. The codification that took place under CDEEP speaks to several conventions that were quite important, as we have been saying. CDEEP did not follow the Montevideo Conference lines, focused on certain more Pacific terms, and the sort of work that had been carried out most notably at The Hague, the famous Hague conferences. But it's not just CDEEP we need to remember. There were other groups that were generating work in a modern international private law, like UNCITRAL and others. Now, as to the normative work that CDEEP was pushing, let us recognize that there has been a great deal of conflict generated by this, and several norms that were referred to while they were studied did not seem sufficient. There was an additional protocol, for instance, on the results of CDEEP in 1984. Several conventions that were and matters that were dealt with in CDEEP 1 and 2 for chronological reasons do not refer to technology as it now weighs on how we assess jurisdictions. But at the same time, they're not forbidden. So it becomes perfectly possible, and that is indeed what is happening, that there be recourse to technology and to the impact as to what kind of notifications were received and what kind of probatory elements were to be found abroad. A great deal was made of the new technologies and their impact on the development of international law and best practices. The Inter-American Juridical Committee, indeed, in August of 2023, approved a number of these. I'd like to refer yet to a fourth point. That's the impact of CDEEP on the development of national private law, as Dr. Arregui has pointed out. It appears really a foregone conclusion to say that CDEEP has weighed heavily on the reforms of various legal entities in the states and the development of private international law in a number of these countries, and decisions that were taken at the procedural level, and also on the acceptance of various laws quite independently of those codes. Dr. Fernandez Arroyo has weighed this very heavily and published on the matter. Tatiana Meckel, for her part, has also referred to the impact of CDEEP on the development of CDEEP legislation, particularly the resolution of internal conflicts vis-à-vis international conflicts. All of this is worth pondering on. In the particular case of Uruguay, for instance, that influence is palpable. In a number of instances, the process that was carried out in 1988, but let us remember that those who drafted Title 10 in that codex, Drs. Soberti and Ulicea, were primarily influenced by the Inter-American solutions as these norms were drafted. Again, in the civil and commercial arenas, the codifying impact of CDEEP is also reflected, again, in Uruguay on the general law on international private law of 2020, and which was published in March of 21. But that is by no means the only source of inspiration for that legal development. The Peruvian code, civil code in 1984, and in Paraguay, same again in 1987, this is evident. And as Perez Nieto points out, at the civil code of the Federal District of Mexico, that is the capital city of the country. All of this was codified in 1988 in that country, and it really compiled all of the solutions that the Inter-American Convention on General Norms of Private International Law that would have been held in 1979 were evident. But after CDEEP 7, and after having heard great praise regarding this whole process, CDEEP 7 was held in Washington in 2009 through various teleconferences, and then on consumers in 2010. And at that point, things rather came to a halt until, as Dr. Arregui mentioned, they got going a little later. But this does not mean by any means that the OAS has not been, to some extent, frustrated in the progressive development of international private law. The Inter-American Juridical Committee, of course, kept chugging, and always with the tremendous support of the Inter-American Law Department and the private international law in the Americas. The committee, as we know, which works within the OAS, it's a consultative body on legal matters and is entrusted with progressive law and the codification of international public and private law. Another part of that work is to work towards greater uniformity in the content. Esteemed doctor, you need to wrap up, madam. The professor is not listening, so that's that. In the ambit of international private law, we saw movements towards the development of several instruments, including the Guide on International Trade Contracts of 1929, and various other challenges that were addressed in 2023, and then one that I mentioned very briefly on the impact of technology on the 2023 work in that regard. As to the situation today, you can look at the webpage of the committee. It is regrettable that the emphasis is not balanced, and we hope that that will soon change. We thank you, Dr. Fresnedo, for your statement and your well-known experience in the Inter-American Juridical Committee and everything that you've been able to share with us with regard to progress in that regard. We now turn to Dr. Maria Mercedes Albornoz, Secretary General of the American Association of Private Institutional Law. You have the floor, madam. You have 7 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you, and a very good afternoon. I represent here the American Association on Private International Law and wish to thank you for your kind invitation. Now, we all know that in this hemisphere, there has been a development of international private law that really has meant that our region is a pioneer in the codification of international private law, and that this has happened through codification regionally, from the Lima Convention in 1987, the Montevideo treaties, even going back to the 19th century, and again in the 20th century, the Bustamante Treaty and the 1940s Bustamante agreements. But moving along a little bit, we see that CDEEP and the instruments adopted as of 1975 are key, both as regards the interior of the region and as regards the impact abroad. Dr. Fresnedo, who just spoke, referred to the first of these in great detail. However, the impact on the development of international private law, or I should say private law of our own countries, must also be considered here. And the second group of general standards had a great impact, for instance, on the development of the civil code of the capital of known as Mexico City, that is the capital of the country of Mexico. This codification process is considered key and a milestone. Now, some of these processes have been taken as a reference, such as the Mexican Conference on Contract Law. But I would also like to refer to the link between CDEEP and the OAS. From the moment of its creation till the present time, there has been a very great deal of interaction with the OAS. Many of the members of CDEEP are, in fact, staff of the OAS or former staff. Dr. Fresnedo herself, Dr. Crijalta, Dr. Moreno Rodriguez, to name but a few. And in the various meetings, annual meetings of CDEEP, there has always been a panel on which the OAS is an important part, speaking on regional and national treaties. Members of CDEEP are in constant contact with the OAS and exchanging comments and putting their heads together on other issues of mutual interest. The Inter-American Juridical Committee, likewise, and its impact on the development of private commercial law in the region is certainly worthy of attention. The Inter-American Juridical Committee has revised several instruments that date back to decades before then and have now been analyzed in light of the 21st century. A number of those examples have already been picked up by Dr. Fresnedo a minute ago, and as a matter of fact, as a member of the committee, which she herself was, she has already underscored. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to repeat what she said. But in the few minutes that I have left, I would like to focus on what, to my mind, is the key issue. I'd like to underscore the fact that the Inter-American Juridical Committee involve a mixed composition. There must be international public law, but there has to be representatives of experts in private law. There has to be both. And too often, the absence of experts in international private law has been held. And after the end of her tenure last year, Dr. Fresnedo, I mean, that is an absence that really is noteworthy. There is also important, it's also important to recognize how clearly important the presence of those specialists has been to the development of legal work in the OAS. And in future, we're not altogether certain how this might evolve. The development of international private law in this hemisphere needs to be considered. We're not really sure how this will go, and hope very much that this will not, if we don't look at all of these aspects, redound to a prejudice to ongoing development of international private law in the hemisphere. It is key that international private law specialists and international public law speak to each other. These are two separate disciplines. The private law looks to people, to individuals, to their own private access to justice, access to be heard, the right to be heard by a jury, to be judged by one's peers. Finally, I'd say, to close, that CDEEP is very willing and eager to continue collaborating in the development of international private law in this hemisphere. We consider it key. And why is that? It is because of the statutory provisions of CDEEP, one of which, as is set forth in the statutes of CDEEP, there is specific mention of the need, indeed the duty, to collaborate with the Organization of American States, with regard to ongoing development of the subject. And by subject, I mean the development of international private law. That's what we're talking about here. So I can only hope that we can indeed refresh our memory in this regard and inject new energy in the need to recruit new and ongoing specialists in this very important field of the development of international private law in this hemisphere. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mercedes Albornoz. You've given us a very good view of the considerations of the Inter-American Private Law Association and the impact that it can have in this area. I'm now pleased to turn to Dr. Nuria Gonzalez Martin, Chair of the Government Board, that's the Mexican Academy of Private, International, and Comparative Law. You are welcome, and we look forward to hearing you, Madam.
Perdón, ahora sí.
This is a horrible, horrible reception, the interpreter points out. It's like putting my head in a well. I'm going to do my best. Great respect to all involved. The speaker. I'd like to contribute to this consideration of CDEEP and the contributions that we can make with a view, of course, to try to avoid what has already been offered by the speakers that have preceded me. Now, CDEEP, without question, changed course after a particular time, and I think this is important to recognize, because we began by recognizing how important regional codification was, and to that end, how the entire hemisphere might benefit. CDEEP 1 that was held in Panama that looked at harmonization and the resolution of conflict of laws in this hemisphere is something we have in mind. There was also, as we have heard, the development of various, of course, of the two main thrusts of law on the continent, the common law and the civil law. Back in 2009, there were 7 CDEEPs for a total of 26 inter-American legal instruments as a result of all of that. The view has been universal. Rather, another characteristic is that there should be a more sectoral, progressive, and pragmatic approach, language that is very deliberately aimed always at being as to the point and pragmatic as possible, avoiding flowery considerations in another style. Now, I could go on, speaking of which, trying to describe the actual codification process, but let me try to get down to brass tacks. Here's the thing. The international private law development in this region has always been innovative. That's what it has been. It has been majorly innovative. As to CDEEP, and with regard to its impact on regional codification, there are several things I could say. First of all, the new paradigm, I believe, in this region, which flows from CDEEP 1, led to a very high level of productivity, fine and well. However, that, alas, has not had the welcome or the reception in a number of areas that one might have hoped, which is why we have to take another look at how this might serve as an instrument of codification. And between 1975 and 1994, we also have to recognize that 84 treaties were brought together, of which a good number, more than half of them, at the OAS, referred to international private law. But after CDEEP 5 was held in 1924 in Mexico, my own home country, the frequency of these CDEEP meetings was broader. And it was every 4 or 5 years. It was rather desultory and less ever since. And CD7, which is the only one, in fact, that I can refer to now, 16 years have gone by. And I need also to say that it has been 31 years, ladies and gentlemen, that there has not been any adoption of any further international private law treaty. 31 years. So maybe it means that the region is simply no longer interested in international private law. That's one conclusion. However, it is precisely the contrary that might appear. The codification group at the OAS is very, very interested. However, there are other elements that have to be taken into account. Due to issues that relate to the OAS itself, there is a question of prioritization to be given to different issues. And international private law is not top of the list. Another very critical element here, no surprise, is budgetary. It's simply a question of how much money there is to go along, to go around, and what priority should be given to the spending of such funds as are made available. There is a further element that has to be considered. There has been a bit of a vacuum created in that codification energy that was felt earlier on. And given this, at present, my sense is that all we can do is to take another look at where we stand, to understand that from 1975 with CDIP-1, where there had been certainly a change of paradigm, we need to admit that we are perhaps again at a crossroads and need to look at where we stand and where we go from here. Our region needs to work on international instruments that can make the inter-American legal system more visible. And at the same time, of course, we need to be sure that such measures and codes as exist are actually being used. So perhaps the question that we need to ask ourselves is, where do we go from here? What have we got within the inter-American system? Why do we need to go and reinvent the wheel, perhaps, within this system? Perhaps we need to look again at what we have and how we can best use what we have, the tools that we already have available, to best effect. And what role might the Inter-American Juridical Committee be able to offer, as Cecilia Fresnedo just suggested, because there appears to be an increasing number of specialists in private law. But where do we go from here? So depending on where one starts and one's particular views, I don't need to tell you, there would be several very valid responses to these rhetorical questions. We were able to share our director of international law here at the OAS, Dante Negro, who very kindly, just last Thursday on the 27th of February, shared with us at the monthly meeting of the Mexican academic legal group that I am honored to preside, told us that the change of paradigm that was faced in 1975 left a great number of jurists of the day rather disquieted. They weren't happy. They said, well, where do we go from here? However, at least for what it's worth, I would like to suggest that doesn't mean that in these 31 years in which an Inter-American Convention on Private Law have gone by and 16 since the last CD, doesn't mean that all of that is for naught. I think what we do need to consider is why that is, but also to take a fresh look at some of the concrete suggestions that are being made. This isn't hard law isn't the only way to go. Soft law has allowed us to adapt perhaps better in some circumstances and to take into account different actors. And it is true that the OAS can continue to play an important role as a filter. I know that the General Assembly and our own committee can continue working on these matters. And sure, we might take a jump forward and consider where we go from here in the next big meeting, which is the General Assembly, which, as you know, is the maximum authority of the organization. And back in October of 22, the decision was taken quite different from anything that had come before, because before then, the General Assembly would convene the CDIP, but had never on its own delved into international private law. There was a resolution of October of 2022 pushed by Mexico, was considered, and at that time, the Inter-American Juridical and Political Committee had been asked to convene a special meeting for the OAS to look again at how and when it wanted to proceed tackling international private law. I do want to underscore as well that the General Assembly has recognized that soft law, as it is called, is certainly something to recognize. Dr. Gonzalez, says the chair. I'm going to ask the speaker, however, is not listening to the chair, but the chair has asked her to wrap up. So, continues the speaker, back in February of 2024, we had a proposal from the Department on International Law that was entitled The Private International Law in the Americas, in which we need to see how this applied to individuals. But let us not forget either that the representatives of our countries are not technical people. They are not specialists in international private law. They're political representatives. And the benefits of proper regulation in this area is not necessarily something that they are best placed to suggest. In this document, then, there are 4 lines of action that are suggested. But after that, in June of 2024, the General Assembly has a second resolution that it had particular. Dr. Muria, no, she's not listening, Chair. The Chair keeps asking whether the speaker is listening. She is not. She is speaking herself. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, at this special meeting, 50 years after the first one. All I can say by way of conclusion is that the main question before us is the question as to whether or not we let things stay as they are, or should we recodify? Is it that the progressive codification of international law through soft law is good enough? There is no question, it seems to me, that this is a period of transition, and in the legal arena, this matter is essential. The development of soft law is certainly here to stay, and it offers an alternative that indeed includes tremendous potential if it is properly used. That's a big if. There are advantages and indeed disadvantages. But the General Assembly has looked at this, and they can again consider what they want to take. The speaker does not hear the chair yet again.
Jurídico interamericano. El factor clave
Doctora
para continuar
González Martín.
promoviendo el desarrollo del soft law.
She's not listening.
Funcional.
Bien.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I thank you for your kind attention.
González Martín.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nuria Gonzalez Martin. We appreciate your view on private international law. We now have the honor of hearing from Dr. Marcos Dota Salguero, Director of International Law Affairs from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay. And he is going to talk about CDIP and the challenges faced in developing private international law. Dr. Dota Salguero, you have 7 minutes, and I please ask you to stick to that time limit. And you have the floor, sir. Thank you very much, Chair. Chair of the Permanent Council, Ambassador of Mexico, permanent representatives, members of the delegations of member states, Secretary of Legal Affairs of the OAS, Director of International Law. Good afternoon. It is a true honor to be able to participate in this special meeting of the Permanent Council to address such an important issue for the entire region. And in this respect, my country is very careful with private international law. Uruguay had CDIPs here twice, 2 and 4, CDIP 2 and 4, and also Professor Perte presided over the CDIP that took place in Washington. So Uruguay has a long story of being or having ties with CDIP, and we are happy to celebrate its 50th anniversary. Before I begin with my presentation, I wanted to echo the words of those that preceded me with respect to the importance of having at the Inter-American Juridical Committee a balanced membership, especially between public and private law. And one of the ways we could do this is by having different experts in different fields of international law at the committee. As a legal advisor of the Foreign Ministry, I wanted to be very practical in my presentation with respect to CDIP's legacy and the development of this process in the Americas and what we can expect or what can we do jointly in the short and medium term. I think the first thing to underscore is that the CDIPs are an example of regional multilateralism, and they have left an important legacy of a very high level. It is not a static corpus of law. It continues to develop, and it has allowed us to support countries in the region, bring them together in a common concept to apply private international law. Based on that foundation, I wanted to talk about 5 points. First, what can we do with respect to private international law from a government perspective? I think it is important that governments take care with respect to the coherence and codification of private international law and international fora, and that there's no overlap. Our delegates in international fora should be duly instructed based on a logic that is generated by capitals of our member states. Secondly, I wanted to highlight the importance of the fact that private international law has academic consultants or advice. Private international law is very technical. All kinds of law are technical, but this is particularly technical. So good advisors are key, and good advice is essential. So academics who study private international law need to be associated with ACIDIP, the Association of Private International Law, because that is a way to have linkages amongst them. Thus, we can have in our capitals advisors. Thirdly, with respect to new matters that we can work on, what I understand that needs to be highlighted. We need to be strategic, we need to be impactful, and we need to not reinvent the wheel. And I talked about specialized fora. There is a great deal of work to be done in private international law, and we need to specialize in those things that bring us together. I think we need to be very empirical with respect to the needs, the practical needs of our people. And I think others have stated this. Private international law directly addresses the problems of common people. It is bottom up. There is a solution to a problem, there's a solution. So we live in an interrelated world. The exponential growth of the mobility of people, goods, and services. And so it is increasingly necessary to have this convergence. I know that you're aware of course, artificial intelligence, climate change, cybercrime, transnational crime. These are realities that actually cause problems for people in our region on a daily basis. And so the idea is not to necessarily deal with migration writ large or other issues by private international law. Rather, we want to facilitate the lives of people and problems related to these issues. We need to be flexible in our solutions. These can be model laws, guides. We don't a priori need to hook on to just one thing. We have a methodological package with respect to private international law, and we can use any of these instruments to solve problems. Fourth point, the specific value that I want to underscore of the Inter-American Convention on Standards and Norms. And I'm very attached to this, not only because it was drafted in Montevideo, but also it is very practical and it is important for private international law. They are the basic instruments for us. Furthermore, many of the current challenges that we are facing when we want to resolve legal problems could be resolved by this convention. For example, equity. It's in Article 9 of the convention, for example. Despite the importance of this convention, it was only ratified by 10 countries in the region. In other words, we could triple those that have ratified it. And it takes me to my last point, something that I believe is very important and could be very impactful at a very low cost. The texts that have come out from CDIP have enormous richness, and they have not been used sufficiently. Many conventions still have not been ratified by a large number of countries. And let me explain. For example, the Inter-American Convention on the Competence in the International Sphere for the effectiveness of international judgments, or the Inter-American Convention on Law Applicable to International Conferences from CDIP 5. Only Venezuela and Mexico have ratified it. So, in fact, these conventions to which a great human capital, academic capital, and material capital were devoted for the prep work and to actually do the work are only bilateral texts. And I think we could do a lot by studying in our capitals and foreign ministries these conventions to see, is there a real reason why our country is not a party to this convention or the other convention? This is work that can be done if we want to make progress. And we might be surprised. Maybe there's no explicit reason, or the reason that existed back when it was analyzed no longer exists. So I think this is important work that could be done, and in the future it could give impetus. And so CDIP's work could then be seen as something that is still open, and these texts are still valid for countries. I believe that the countries could analyze them and perhaps become parties to them. So I invite you to begin this evaluation process, look at these different conventions and treaties to see if there is really a reason why countries are not parties to the conventions. And this way we could really drive forward the CDIP process now that we're celebrating 50 years of the process. Thank you, Dr. Salguero. I really appreciate your contribution with respect to this issue. Finally, to conclude, we have Dr. Jorge Sanchez Cordero. He is the external advisor of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico on private international law. Dr. Sanchez Cordero, welcome to the Permanent Council. You have 7 minutes, sir.
¿Está conectado, doctor?
Is he connected? Dr. Cordero, are you there? Asked the chair.
No está. Doctor Sánchez.
Dr. Sanchez Cordero, could you please request the floor through the CUDA platform, says the chair.
Adelante, por favor.
Please go ahead, sir. You have the floor.
A esta honrosa
We are celebrating 50 years of CDIP. We have participated in an active way in CDIP. CDIP has come up with different texts, excellent texts actually, and they have been in the vanguard with respect to international law. Now, we need to look about the evolution of CDIP's work. At the first CDIP in Panama, 1975, that CDIP was very successful. We had 6 international conventions that were adopted: the Convention on the Conflict of Laws, Inter-American Convention on Trade, Inter-American Convention on Conflict of Law on Checks, Convention on Letter Rogatories, and also Obtention of Evidence, and Convention of Powers, and CDIP II in Montevideo, 1979. This was no less successful. 8 conventions were approved at CDIP II, Inter-American Convention on Conflict of Laws on Check. On companies, Inter-American Convention on domiciles, the Inter-American Convention on compliance with precautionary measures, norms on trade, extraterritoriality of judgments, Inter-American Convention on arbitration decisions, also with respect to evidence, CDIP III in Bolivia, 1984. The impetus of CDIP began to slow down. We had 3 conventions that were approved, one with respect to minors, one that had to do with foreign judgments, and also one that had to do with the capacity of legal entities, CDIP IV. Again, Montevideo, 1989. We had several conventions on transportation contracts, Inter-American Convention on Minors, and others. CDIP V that took place in Mexico, 2 conventions: Inter-American Convention on the law applicable to international contracts, Inter-American Convention on restitution of minors. CDIP VI in Washington, D.C., 2 conventions and 1 resolution: the model law on real estate guarantees, the Convention on Transportation and Merchandise. Then we had CDIP 7, also in Washington, D.C. We only had 2 documents approved, although 8 were presented. One had to do with consumers and also electronic registries to implement the model law on real estate guarantees. And so, as we said, these texts are very interesting, these conventions and resolutions. They're very modern. However, how many countries in the Americas have ratified these inter-American conventions that were drafted at the CDIPs? And secondly, what are the international precedents? What is the orientation of the different suits, for example, that we see in courts? Do they cite these inter-American conventions, for example? These elements are indispensable to do any evaluation of the work of the CDIPs. And what could we suggest to really have these texts evolved or be used? In the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, we saw that free trade started to falter after Mercosur and NAFTA. We had these different agreements, of course, in North America and the Mercosur, and this was to resolve, of course, trade disputes. NAFTA and other protocols, and we can look at the orientation of the different suits that have been brought in that framework. We can see how they were resolved. And then we had another important aspect to point out. International organizations, also the adaptability of these because of trade and the costs to be able to adapt this are important. Other international conventions that come out of CDIP have to do with trade, but of course our reality has changed. And we saw this, or rather Dr. Marcos talked about this. Climate change is an issue that we didn't face before, or others. And so I believe that things are evolving quickly. Yes, Americas is a large continent, and CDIPs can help us build an architecture for the region. To this end, we need to identify current issues we are facing, and we need to harmonize our legislation. I believe that this is extremely important. We have UNCITRAL, we have the Hague framework. All of this is very important, but we need to do careful analysis of the current situation that we're facing and what are the precedents that we have. This is very important to be able to understand the text and what are the legal tensions that exist in trade and in daily lives of our citizens. And once inter-American conventions are adopted, they're easy to monitor. And then also we could evaluate the efficiency of the text. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was an honor. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much, Dr. Sanchez Cordero, for your intervention and your perspective on strengthening private international law. And that was a very clear presentation on behalf of the Permanent Council delegates. I want to thank all our panelists for their very enlightening interventions. They were all compelling, and it was interesting to hear about private international law and its development in the Americas. Your contribution has given us an important vision of this kind of law. We appreciate your participation. Colleagues, let us move on to the last item on our order of business. If there are any delegations that would like to take the floor is open. The delegation of Uruguay has the floor. Thank you, Chair. First of all, we wanted to thank the delegation of Mexico for promoting the inclusion of this issue on our order of business and for this special meeting. We thank our distinguished panelists for their presentations today. We would like to say that we're so happy to be here at this 50th anniversary of, or commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law that took place in Panama, which began a process of codification of private international law in the Americas. This is something my country, Uruguay, played an important role in, since we had the second and fourth conferences in our country where we adopted different inter-American conventions on trade, on companies, restitution of minors, just to mention a few of the conventions adopted. The creation of these legal frameworks have been crucial to consolidate legal certainty and predictability in legal relations between our countries. Chair, as panelists have mentioned, our hemisphere is one of the pioneers in the codification and modernization of private international law. This is thanks to the political will of our countries to cooperate and work together in order to have a legal architecture to protect and defend the rights of persons in the realm of private international law. So in a current context, which is characterized by increasing globalization and development of new technologies, in which we have a multiplication of multi or international transactions, it is important that our countries, through this organization, continue to strengthen the development of private international law in the hemisphere. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dominican Republic has the floor.
Agradecemos la inclusión en el orden del
Thank you. We are happy to have had this item on our order of business, which is the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference of Private International Law, which was celebrated in Panama City in 1975.
de las embajadoras, representantes permanentes.
I would also like to hail the leadership of the ambassadors of Mexico and Panama that have sought to bring this matter to the special session. We're also very grateful to the contributions of all of the distinguished panelists. Today, we honor this 50th anniversary of a conference that really marked a historic day in the codification of international private law in our region. The overall balance of CDEEP to date has been positive and notable. In quantitative terms, just listen. In 7 conferences, 26 inter-American instruments have been adopted having to do with the codification of effective laws among the states and the better relation in the context of family law and commercial law and procedural law. All of this, from a world standpoint and regional standpoint, shows how important the weight and the influence of international private law has been. And CDEEP, in that regard, has been a significant element. Let us also contribute the fact that CDEEP has helped codify the various standards of international private law. This has been something that has marked the everyday life of people in our countries. This is not a theoretical issue, but it is critical that all of the sectors that are involved in international private law continue to feel part and parcel of this development, and players in the progressive development, ongoing development of international private law and its updating within the context of inter-American legal standards. Thank you. Thank you. I'm pleased to give the floor, says the chair, to the Colombian delegation. Thank you. Let me begin by saying that this special session to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first specialized conference of Inter-American Development of Public Law, private Inter-American law, is very, very welcome. Bravo also to the contribution of the legal department in this context, speaking about the codification of international private law in our region at large. Let me also contribute how much we appreciate Jean-Miguel Arrigui's contributions and other panelists who have pointed out in this commemorative session how and who has contributed to where we are today. What was launched in 1975 in Panama is certainly a long stone's throw from where we are today in the public and in the commercial area, and with the support of the Organization of American States, much has been done to modernize international private law in the Americas. Over these 50 years, the various instruments have, the various conferences, rather, have led to the development of various instruments, even in various different legal contexts and challenges of all sorts. Those conferences have nonetheless pointed to a more predictable legal framework and a more uniform legal framework, all of which has indeed in turn, I think, weighed very positively on the legal development of the member states of this organization. The modernization of international private law is also a result of these efforts that both the states and the Secretariat of Legal Affairs have tackled. Let us simply remember that at the beginning, the main aim was to try to ensure that procedural matters could be more harmonious, to avoid unnecessary litigious action taken by two different countries. But today, the idea is to uniformize substantive law, as we can see, going for more simple statements, as was published in 21. From a historic standpoint, as many have pointed out from day one in Panama, more than 26 inter-American legal instruments, 20 conventions, various model laws and instruments, uniform instruments have been generated. Procedural law, commercial law, international contracts, to name but these. In all of those efforts, cooperation and collaboration among the inter-American states has been notable. And so, too, the search for legal solutions that will be more expeditious and more harmonious. All of this in the areas of trade, family, the implementation of sentences is but a few of the examples, including the streamlining of international trade, last but not least. All of these are elements that we do well to remember. But let us not forget the structural challenges that have always been before us, and the universality of the legal systems, the need also to respond to new global realities. This is not the world it was. While there are some elements that say, look at immigration, look at climate change, look at digitalization, to name but a very few aspects that are rather more of this era than that. But yet another challenge that we believe should be tackled in this new dispensation is the fact that international public law and international private law is not at all as wide apart as it used to be. The treaties that have been adopted that are not binding, but that have been subscribed to by states and other subjects of international law, have, like it or not, ever more impact on private law, bearing in mind that today more than ever, there really are there's great communication and fluidity among these various different areas of law. They are not totally, they don't stand alone. And that is where the Department of International Law of the Department of International Juridical Instruments here at the OAS becomes ever more important. And this is what we have been calling transnational justice. So we thank you very much for calling this special session. And in doing so, Colombia wishes to say how eager it is to contribute to this ongoing and stellar effort of the organization. Thank you. Thank you. Costa Rica is recognized. Thank you, Chair, and a good afternoon to you and to all. The permanent representation of Costa Rica is very pleased to give the floor here to Attorney Raquel Yarbas-Holguin, who is entrusted with international law and private law, representing the Legal Affairs Department of the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Costa Rica. She will refer to this matter and how important it is for our country. We believe that her statement will speak to the importance of continuing our effort to harmonize international private law in the Americas and the challenges we have before us. Thank you very much. Dr. Raquel Vargas of the Legal Department, indeed the head of the Legal Department of the Foreign Affairs Department of Costa Rica, has the floor. Thank you, sir. Well, a good afternoon, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of the Permanent Council, dear friends. What an honor it is for the delegation of Costa Rica to be with you at this special session of the Permanent Council to mark the 50th anniversary of the first conference of the Inter-American Gathering on International Private Law. CDEEP from the beginning has been an essential platform from which various other instruments of inter-American law have come about that have had an influence on private law. And it is through such instruments that we have managed to obtain greater legal certainty and efficiency in commercial, labor, mercantile, and family law, to name but these. And given that general construct of international legal communication, the development of international private law has weighed heavily, particularly in this globalized context. Costa Rica, for its part, has developed fairly significantly in that area, very much in the case of mutual and reciprocal legal assistance and cooperation in the implementation of foreign judicial resolutions, to name but these. There are other areas. But in any event, all of these represent a key means by which international justice can be upheld so that there can be ever more easier solutions for the resolution of controversies and ongoing relations in that regard. Between 2023 and 2024, and through our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Religious Affairs, we have focused on the development of instruments for the development of international private law specifically. That has been aimed at modernizing our legal assistance so that the challenges flowing from globalization and ongoing mobilization of people be both tackled jointly because they make a difference. Just recently, and with the help of our embassy in the United States and through the aegis of the permanent representation before the OAS, we held a key meeting with strategic partners in the area of international private law. We met with the Department of Justice of the United States to see how we were doing and how we should continue to proceed in the implementation and respect of the various legal treaties that we've already developed, and how we might, in fact, use more digitalization for the sake of privacy and effectiveness. All of this worked very, very well. we were able to find a good number of solutions, particularly with regard to compiling in the area of proof, burdens of proof. Costa Rica, in this regard, was pleased to be able to share for its part what progress had been made in the legal ambit, and we are very, very pleased at the assistance that was offered to us. We spoke about the effort that Costa Rica is deploying in order to use electronic means to issue notices and to develop further mechanisms of and streamlining our communication with different areas of authority so that assistance, legal aid, can be effective. Thank you for your reception to all of this. We certainly decided that it would make a good use of our time to think along these lines in terms of the future. We also wanted to be sure that we could bolster our legal certainty in some of these areas. And we have just published a paper on international law, and we would like to offer it for what it's worth to the rest of the membership to see whether you find it of any interest. The idea has been to modernize what we're doing, focusing on the different conventions that we've been looking at, but also bearing in mind what each delegation is contributing, because we certainly don't want a duplication of efforts. We want to offer something that is streamlined, that is succinct, and that is found to be useful by the rest of you. International private law is for people. It's, for instance, somebody that's divorced and needs to publish the fact that she or he is now divorced, or where there's been some commercial institute. But the whole document has been drafted with a view to being useful and modern and an updating. Dr. Vargas, says the chair, I'm going to ask you to wrap up. I'm afraid you're out of time. Well, 30 years ago, we didn't have such an instrument, and that's why we thought one of our strategies should certainly be focused on taking store of what we've got. Where have we come? What have we got that's worth pursuing? And what do we need to change? Where do we go from here, in other words? And what might be new areas of interest? Certainly, Costa Rica reaffirms its commitment to the development of international private law at the international level. And we think it is absolutely imperative that the mechanisms we already have be modernized and always serve to protect the rights of all and access to justice. Thank you. Thank you, Costa Rica, says the chair. Chile is recognized. Thank you. Chile takes good note of the presentations that have been made by the various contributors to this panel at this special session. We're grateful for it. We also thank the contribution of Dr. Elena Baños, ambassador from Mexico. As the conceptual note indicates, which the delegation of Mexico itself distributed, the development of international private law in the Americas has been a dynamic process and a progressive process. The idea has been to update the national legal context at a time when technologically, commercially, and in so many other respects, the law, private law, has in fact developed very quickly. For Chile, I'd like to say that the Legal Private Law Association is a group that speaks to a number of different legal instruments and 5 different legal groups. We have the International Private Code that was adopted in 1928. That was good at the time, but certainly is not, in fact, attuned to international private law today. That is from a quotation on the subject. But when we're looking at best practices, Chair, I think it's fair to say that each national context, of course, has its own needs. For Chile, I can tell you that where international private law comes in, what we've got is not enough. It simply is not enough. We have a great deal of fragmenting of some of these issues. We need to take another look at all of this and to smooth out areas in which we might find better international cooperation. To begin with, it would be good to think of a modernization, an updating of international private law, certainly focused on commercial aspects, but as it relates to links between Europe and Latin America, inter alia. But the consolidation of international private law in the areas of the family, of arbitration, and so many other legal constructs pushes us, I believe, to recognize with satisfaction at the great efforts that have been deployed by this organization. Also, the need to recognize that where we, for instance, see the International Conference at The Hague and UNCITRAL and other well-known legal fora, we are not acting alone. And we need certainly to look at the resources available. We don't want to continue fragmenting what we've got, but doing the best with what we've got. Thank you. Thank you. Chile, says the chair. The delegation of El Salvador is recognized. Thank you. We're very grateful to all of the experts for their contribution. That certainly put us, I think, very much in the picture of how far we've come since the first international conference on private international commercial law, CDEEP, and the need to pursue our efforts to update this body of law. As we mark this 50th anniversary of that first important legal conference, it is worth noting that 6 inter-American conventions have led to the harmonization on the standards to be followed with regard to conflict of laws in the Americas, and the need to codify international private law in this region. From the beginning, CDEEP has played a central role in that regard. These norms that bear on private relations and commercial relations amongst each other and that serve to avoid conflict of laws and offer legal certainty internationally are worth recalling. CDEEP has led to a very rich asset which belongs to all of us and that speaks to an international order that seeks to be peaceful and egalitarian, and certainly up to the challenges of digitalization and modern mobility. If I may quickly mention, I think, an interesting point for El Salvador, the rogatory letters and reception of proof of this or that issue abroad and delegation of powers, among others, were very, very instrumental in pushing our own judicial international cooperation. There were various international conferences that were held that led to model laws, and these bear recalling as well. They have helped with regard to adoption of minors, with commercial arbitration, and so many other key legal areas. All of this has contributed to the reform and to the updating of private domestic law in our countries. In our case, the law that was based on the Inter-American model helped update international services that dealt with telemarketing and teleworking, distance working, among others. They were inspired by model laws and the Indo-American norm that has been established over these many years. Now, we are absolutely determined to continue working in the multilateral environment because beyond being very much a part of the specialized Inter-American Conference on the subject, we are also part of the United Nations effort on commercial trade and also the Hague Convention on Private Law. We, from July until the 31st of July of next year, will be working on these matters and will be contributing to digitalization and ease of trade, commercial trade, among others. Chair, it is clear that international private law is ever more important in everyone's life, given the exchange of goods and services, border disputes, litigious issues that have to do with criminal issues or family, domestic issues, you name it. All of this goes to legal certainty and peaceful cohabitation amongst us. The more we understand each other, the more we understand our legal frameworks, we will see how far we've come from that first conference and how best we can meet the challenges of the present time, like, for instance, the ongoing use of technologies to establish burdens of proof, the question of migration, and ongoing international private issues that demand ever more efficient and fluid and prompt solutions, as one of our colleagues has already pointed out. With an aim to strengthen international private law, we believe that the cooperation among member states here must go forward. We need to do more in terms of legal certainty in this hemisphere, and particularly to look at the comparing and contrasting of Anglo-Saxon law, common law that is, and Latin legal roots. Of course, bearing in mind the Hague Convention, but others like it. We want to be sure that transnational justice in the region is upheld, and that certainly should be one of the main challenges we set for each other. We very much welcome the work of the Inter-American Juridical Committee and the International Law Committee here that have added so much to the progressive development of private international law. Let me close by committing to you on behalf of my country that we will keep at it and that we will work very, very hard so that inter-American legal cooperation can move forward as it has done to further codify our legal systems in the private international laws for the benefit of all of our citizens. I thank you very much.
La palabra la delegación.
Thank you. Bolivia has the floor. Thank you, Chair. We thank Mexico for its leadership to organize this special meeting. We also thank the panelists for their valuable contributions to this reflection on the evolution of private international law in the Americas. The process of harmonizing private international law in our region has been an ongoing effort given the challenges we face. From the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law that took place in 1975, numerous instruments have strengthened legal certainty and cooperation amongst member states. Bolivia recognizes the importance of this framework and reiterates its commitment to these instruments so they continue to be effective and valid. However, private international law is facing new challenges given technological advancements. And so it is fundamental to analyze electronic trade, protection of data, use of artificial intelligence and justice. We believe that the Inter-American system must continue to explore a way to have harmonization and also to effectively apply the principles of justice and legal certainty. In this context, our delegation would like to underscore that we need to analyze the Inter-American conventions that were adopted in CD and identify where we need to modernize them. Our trans-border transactions mean that member states need to build solutions and laws that are adapted to our current challenges. We need to also look at the challenges we have in trans-border private law, especially with respect to digitalization of documents and trans-border trade. These can offer us some efficiencies, but it also means that we need to look at protection of fundamental rights and interoperability. We reiterate our commitment to private international law in the Americas, and we would like to consolidate cooperation on this matter. We reiterate the importance of exploring strategies to increase the capacity of OAS with respect to private international law, and the importance of our collective efforts to continue to make these laws evolve and fit the needs of our people. Thank you. Thank you, Bolivia. Peru has the floor. Chair, it is wonderful for Peru to be able to participate in this meeting to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law, CD. We appreciate the presentations made by the specialists who were with us. These show that half a century later, it is essential to recognize the importance of private international law. It provides legal certainty, and so private international law facilitates trade, investments, the resolution of disputes, and the protection of individual rights in trans-border situations. Peru has actively contributed to the development of private international law and the inter-American system. For example, it has been active in CDIP and the adoption of instruments. For example, the Inter-American Convention on General Standards of Private International Law and the Inter-American Convention on International Trade and Arbitration. These conventions are examples for our national legal systems and for the modernization for the normative framework of trade and investment in the region. Lima has been the arbitration panel for many, many disputes. And this is because the arbitration panels allow people to also have access to great food. Private international law has a direct impact on people's daily lives. It regulates international trade. It gives certainty to contracts that are entered into by people from different countries. It allows for alternative mechanisms to resolve disputes like mediation or arbitration, and it also helps families that are international. In an ever more interconnected world, Peru reiterates its commitment to private international law and its development and legal cooperation in our region to benefit our citizens, our businesses, and our economies. 50 years after the first CD, we reaffirm the importance of this kind of law for our peoples. Thank you. We thank Peru. Mexico, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. The intervention of our country will be made by Marta Alvarez Rendon. She is the director of the Department of Private International Law of the Secretariat of Foreign Relations of Mexico. Dr. Marta Rendon, you have the floor, madam. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The government of Mexico is thrilled that you have convened this special meeting of the Permanent Council to recall the codification of private international law through CDIP 1. My delegation would also like to thank the experts who shared their vision with respect to private international law that was born from CDIP. That has allowed us to recall this process of codification. We believe that we need to look forward with respect to the progressive development of private international law, and we call upon states to reflect on the methodology that would be optimal for its development. Now, we want to incentivize that we have an approach that is based on persons that move from one country to another, because we believe that these are new ways of working and living. We also want to reiterate the importance of the Inter-American Juridical Committee. We believe that this is the body that needs to lead the codification in or with respect to the modernization of private international law. As a result of CDEEP, we have different inter-American conventions that are very important, laws applicable to foreign investors and trade. This has allowed us to really delve into issues that are of interest to our countries. And we have these inter-American conventions that we can look at. We have now new kinds of contracts, new kinds of trade, new kinds of technology. My delegation would like to take up a proposal that was made in prior meetings where we made some suggestions about this. We think we need a general study on the development of private international law in different countries in our region. We believe that this general assessment about the development that different countries have furthered will allow us to identify the challenges that we are facing with respect to trans-border relations. We believe it would be timely and appropriate to gather information through a survey or questionnaire with respect to private international law in each country. And we believe that the focal points for private international law development would be valuable allies for this and to gather information. Then we could have constructive dialogue that we could engage in to identify common challenges that exist in the region. This would allow us to know what the priorities are with respect to these international relations or trans-border relations. This would give us more clarity about the work that we should be undertaking as a region in the future. On top of this, we call upon you to reflect on some points that the experts made today. Among them, I wanted to underscore a few. For example, the validity of identifying common interests and issues that will allow us to work jointly to resolve problems in private relations, to prioritize instruments that are global instead of inter-American necessarily. Also reflect on the complementary nature of codification that takes place in global fora versus what we do regionally. Finally, we can reflect on the nature of the instruments or the initiatives that we implement. Due to all of the foregoing, we want to again reiterate our support for these activities to continue to have development of private international law in the Americas. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mexico. I want to offer the floor to the Secretary General. Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, friends, I'm very thankful to our experts and panelists that intervened today at the Permanent Council. It was wonderful to be here at this special meeting to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference on Private International Law. Throughout the years, there have been a few opportunities to reflect on this kind of law, which is very technical but has an impact on people's daily lives in the Americas.
private international law looks for trans-border justice for people. We have an increase in migration and transactions that are cross-border. So we need to make sure we have legal instruments that can be implemented in different jurisdictions through legal cooperation. The conferences have come up with a regional corpus of laws. Between 1975 and 1994, more than 50% of the conventions adopted by the OAS were in private international law. So we see its importance. We can recall the importance of the conventions from 1975, and we need to think for the future. The conferences allowed for the progressive development of private international law. And in 2022, 2024, we had some important resolutions. The Inter-American Juridical Committee and its technical secretariat has been very effective in promoting private international law. It has had model laws and guides which have had an influence multilaterally and on domestic law. For example, we have a model law on real estate guarantees. We have a model law on simplified companies or corporations. We have a model law also with respect to digital storage, which then led to other model laws in 2024. The Inter-American system has contributed to universal legal processes in the last decade, but this is not well known or recognized. I would call upon member states to support the work of the Inter-American Juridical Committee and also the Legal Secretariat, providing resources so private international law can be developed. With few resources, a lot has been done, but more resources are needed if we want to be in the vanguard of this kind of law. Thank you very much to Secretary General Luis Almagro. I'd like to thank delegations for their interventions, and the different perspectives shown today reflect the commitment of states to strengthen private international law in the Americas. Their contributions have been key to enrich our discussion of CDIPs and have shown the challenges and opportunities that exist currently. Also, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our distinguished panelists who have enriched this meeting with their contributions. They have been key to do a deep dive into our achievements as well as to reflect on the steps to take in the future. I reiterate our thanks to the Mission of Mexico and the Department of International Law for organizing this meeting and for having prepared this meeting. We have underscored the importance of continuing to strengthen the foundation of private international law in the Americas and the need to adapt to new challenges like globalization, technology, and international mobility. Legal cooperation amongst states is key to ensure that our legal frameworks are effective and limber and can meet our new needs. And I appreciate the lessons that we have been taught this afternoon. And I wanted to add something which was not touched upon in the different interventions, but I think it is very important. Private international law in the Americas is a law that was created in the Americas. Domestic law in countries has been influenced by Napoleonic law, Roman law, and other kinds of law from other countries. But this law, private international law, comes from the Americas, for example, from the treaties of Montevideo of the 19th century, the Bustamante Code of 1928. This has created our own corpus of law. So these are laws that are based on our reality. So we need to nationalize law to be able to decolonize law. And so I think that this is something that is our own. It is a great contribution that we are making alongside Germanic law, Anglo-Saxon law, Roman law. This is something that we need to celebrate, and we need to thank these Inter-American conferences for their legacy. And so I believe it's very important, this commemoration today of the 50th anniversary of the first Inter-American Specialized Conference. And I invite all member states to continue to collaborate on these crucial issues in order to continue perfecting private international law in the Americas to ensure legal certainty and also promoting cooperation among our nations. Above all, strengthening mechanisms for our people. More rights for more people, which is the slogan of our organization. I thank you all for your participation, and this meeting is adjourned.